In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the water pump on this Volkswagen GTI. Let's get into it. We're going to remove this panel. There's some screws all along here. You want to use a T25 socket. Take these out. There should be others there. And then do the same on the other side. With all those out, just grab the panel, slide it towards the back of the vehicle, and it comes right down. Disconnect the electrical connector right here. There's a little lock tab. I'm just going to use a pick, push that up. Then you can push down on the tab, slide that out. You might have to get the pick underneath there. There we go. Just slides out. Just got under the lock. The lower screws right here, we're going to take those and loosen those up. I'm going to use a T25 socket. We're not going to take it out completely, but we just want it finger tight just to hold the fan in. And we'll do the same on the other side. And now we're loosening this one up. And it's just a couple threads on, so that's loose. We're going to disconnect the connector for the mass airflow sensor. Just push down on the tab. Slide that off out of the way. Loosen up this worm clamp right here. There's a 7mm socket I'm going to use. Slide that back. It should be able to separate right here. This may look a little different than what you have. There should be an air box right here, but the procedure is going to be very similar. Right down here, take this bolt out. I'm going to use a 10mm socket. Pull that out. And if you have the factory air box, you're going to have a couple of holes down here and some screws. You're going to have to take those screws out. You should be able to use a T20 socket to get those out. Grab the air box and just slide it out of the way. We're going to disconnect the battery, slide the cover off using a 10mm socket. Loosen up the terminal, slide that off and out of the way. And use the T25 socket, take this screw out. Top. And that's going to be loose. And the same on the other side. And take that screw out, and this fan will be loose. Now we can loosen up the bolts by hand. Take those out, take the screws out. Just hold the fan shroud while you're doing that. That's good. And just slide it right down. Now we're going to drain the coolant system. This vehicle does not have a drain in the radiator, so we're going to take off the lower radiator hose. You're going to use a pick and slide this clip up. After you slide that up, then you can grab the hose and just slide it back. Make sure you have a drain bucket underneath to catch all the coolant. After the coolant's drained out, now we can reattach the lower hose. We're going to lock that down, push that lock all the way down, and attach it to the radiator, just like that. We're going to disconnect this lower intake tube. Just use a straight blade screwdriver, slide this clip out. You could use a pick as well. So we could take the clip off completely. Let's put it on later. Grab the tube. Slide it out. Using a T30 socket, take this bolt out. It's just going to stay part of the tube. It's caged, but just loosen that up. Down below on the hose, we're going to take this clip off. I'm just going to use a pick just to get under here, just to make it easier. Or you can just push this button right here. Slide that connector off. There we go. And on that same pipe, we're going to take this screw out of the bracket, use a T30 socket. That pipe is loose. That screw is caged, just like the one below, so it's just going to stay with the pipe. And loosen up the worm clamp on the pipe. At the throttle body, use a 7mm socket. Just grab the pipe, slide it off the throttle body. And it slides right out. Just be careful of the radiator. You don't want to bend the fins. Disconnect the connector for the throttle body. Just push down on the tab. Slide that off, out of the way. I'm going to take the throttle body bolts out. I'm going to use a T30 socket. There's 4 bolts holding the throttle body on. Take those out. And I'm just going to hold the throttle body when I take the last one out. So it doesn't fall. Grab the throttle body, give it a wiggle. Slide it out. There's 2 screws underneath this bracket. We're going to use a T25 socket. Take those screws out. Slide that bracket down. I'm just going to take the connectors out of the bracket. Just slide those out. There we go. Just slide those out. You get a little more room. This wiring harness right here, just push down on this little tab. Just slide that off, out of the way. At the base of this tube, there's a bolt. We're going to use a 10mm socket. Take that bolt out. There we go. And if you follow that tube back, you can see where there's a bolt. We're going to use a T30 socket. Take that bolt out. Try to catch it. Using some hose clamp pliers, slide the hose clamp back. And down below, take this hose clamp, slide that up, out of the way. You can grab the hose, try to slide it off. Right there. Same with over here. Might need a pick. might want to get a bucket underneath. You might lose some coolant. And that comes out. Just pull that pipe out of the way. Disconnect the connector up here on the purge valve. And there's another connector down here. Disconnect this one. I'll slide this underneath. Connector at the oil pressure sensor. I'm going to disconnect that. Just push on the tab, slide that out. Disconnect the connector at the fuel pressure sensor. Slide that off. Then on the water pump there's a connector. Disconnect that one. Just push down on the tab. There we go. Slide that out of the way. Just have it come over here. That's good. I'm going to take this hose off. I'm just going to use a pick. Move that clip to the side. Grab the pipe and just wiggle it a little bit, slide it down. Might be a little bit of coolant in there. Dump that in the drain bucket. And slide that out of the way. Then we're going to take the other hose off, do the same thing. There's a clip. Just use a pick. There we go. Pop that off. Now we're going to take this cover off. There's a bolt right here. We're going to use a hex key, 5mm hex key. You could use a socket as well. Get that loose, take that bolt out. Slide that off. There should be another bolt right here. This vehicle doesn't have that. Take that one out as well. And just grab the cover. And just slide it out. Now I'm just going to use a trim tool. You can use a prying tool. Just slide the water pump belt off. It is a good idea to replace this if you're doing this. This one's in pretty good shape. There you go, just pry that off out of the way. We're going to take the bolts out for the water pump. There's 5 of them. I'm using a 4mm hex socket. There we go. Take those out. There we go. Slide that out. We got one more. And loosen this one up. Take that last bolt out. Now grab the pump and just give it a wiggle up and down a little bit. You gotta twist it and just slide it out. I'm gonna slide it towards the driver's side of the vehicle. There you go. And it just slides right out. We're gonna take this tube out. I'm just gonna use some needle nose pliers. Just be careful. Don't ruin the O-ring if you don't have a new one. Just pry it out. Just work it back and forth. There we go. There it is. Use a little silicone on the O-ring. And slide it into the new water pump housing, just like that. Now we're just gonna clean this surface area. Just use a rag and some brake parts cleaner. If there's any gasket material, you wanna use a scraper, but it shouldn't be too bad. Clean off those little dowel pins. If there's corrosion on there, you wanna get a little bit of sandpaper or emery cloth. And wipe those down, that's good. And just slide the new pump in place. Make sure you go around the belt. Slide the wires out of the way from up top. Here we go. Oh, that pipe's falling out. There we go. Just going to tip the pump down a little bit. Just slide the belt on. Then try to pull the pump up to get into the dowel pin. Get that lined up. That looks good. All right, that looks good. Everything looks like it's lined up. Belt's in a good spot. Get the bolts started. And then top bolt. And then two smaller bolts. There it is. Now we're going to torque these in sequence to 6.6 foot-pounds, starting with the center one. And move to the bottom. This one right here. And this last one right here, up on top. There we go. I'm going to take that cap off and put the cover on. Slide the cover. Slide the cover in place. Goes right over the belt. Put that screw in. Get that started. And there's another screw for down below. That was missing before. We'll tighten those down. And just snug those down. And snug that one down. Now slide the hoses in place. You want to reset the locks, that little lock tab, reset that. Get that lined up. Make sure it clicks in place. Do the same with this one. Push down on that lock. Line it up. Lock it in place. That's good. Now take the hose. This is going to line up same way it came out. Slide that over. There we go. That's going to go into the water pump. And the other hose is going to go right here. Put all the hose clamps in place. Slide that down. Slide that on. That's good right there. And slide this bolt in place. Get that started. And we'll just snug that down. That's good. And the bolt that goes under this pipe. Get that started. That's good. Now take the wires, slide those in position, run these back around. Some of these are going to come through here. It's going to connect right there. This is going to connect to the throttle body. And there's 2 wires back here. These are going to connect to the water pump. One's the coolant sensor. Some vehicles may not have this other connector. It's going to go right there. Push that on. The lower one. The original water pump didn't have this connector. Goes underneath. And slide the wiring harness through. Connect the oil pressure sensor. Lock that down. And the fuel rail pressure sensor, you want to connect that. Lock that down. And slide the harness through. And connect the connector here for the intake sensor. And then this one's going to go to the throttle body once we get that on. Take the throttle body, slide it in place. If the gasket's old, you want to replace the gasket, but ours looks pretty good. Take the bolts, get those started. Get those bolts started. You can do this from underneath if you need to. And snug those down. Those are snug. And I'm going to torque these to 43 inch-pounds. It's a little tricky getting a torque wrench in there. Do the best you can. Now, slide the connectors into the bracket. And this wiring harness is going to slide onto that bracket right there. That's in place. Take the 2 screws, get those started. And tighten this bracket down, snug it up. Connect the connector for the throttle body. Lock it down. Now slide the intake pipe down. Just be careful of the radiator. Get that lined up on the throttle body. And before we tighten that down, we can get the bolts started. That's started. Now we'll get the one started underneath. I'll get this bolt started. And we can tighten this one down. Snug that down. I'll take the clip, get the retainer clip started. Back in position. Whoops. Push that in. Line this up and lock it down. That's good. Now we can tighten the upper bolt. Snug that down. All right, that's snug. There's a connector right here. And connect the connector right there, and tighten down the worm clamp. Make sure that's snug. Give it a wiggle. That's good. Fan assembly. And just slide it in place. Slide it up. There it goes. And take the screws, get those started. There we go. And get the other screws in place. At least those are started. Then you want to get the top ones in just to make sure everything lines up before you tighten those down. And put the top bolts in. Get that started. If you have to, move the fan around a little bit. That's good. And the other bolt on the other side. With those in, now we can tighten these down. Snug that down. And snug this one down. Tighten the lower bolts. Nice and snug. That's good. That's snug. Take the connector. And lock it in place. And push down on the lock. That's good. And slide the shield in place. That's good. Take the bolts. Get these all started. We'll tighten those down. And slide the airbox back in place. Get that lined up. Line the snorkel up. Get the bolts started behind the airbox. Snug those down. Snug that down. And the screw that goes back here, you want to put those in place and tighten those down. Snug that down. That's good. Tighten the clamp down. Snug that down. Take the connector, line that up, lock it down. Now we're going to connect the battery. Take the cover off. Put the negative terminal on. Using a 10mm socket, snug it down. Give it a wiggle. Make sure it's tight. Take the cover, slide that in the back, lock it down. Now we're going to add the coolant. Take the cap off. You can use a funnel using the appropriate type of coolant. I'm going to fill it up. All right, when it's full, take the funnel out. You can start the vehicle, run the vehicle for about 15 to 20 minutes, monitoring the engine, making sure it's not overheating. After it has completely warmed up to operating temperature, shut the vehicle down, let it cool down, and then adjust your coolant level accordingly.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.